Well, my name is Christina Anthony. I'm the exhibitions manager at Hickory Museum of Art. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program, Exploring New Media with Victoria Bradbury. This event is presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, Contemporary Voices, which features work by Bruce Nauman, Juan Logan, and Joseph Kasuth. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend that you come visit. It's up through April 3rd. Right now, we are running a campaign to bring school-age children into the gallery, and it's called You Complete the Exhibit, because this artwork needs to be experienced in person. So again, the show runs through April 3rd. I'd like to thank SureTape for their annual sponsorship of our exhibitions in the Shuford Gallery. The show is also made possible by a partnership with Art Bridges. It's an organization whose mission is to expand access to American art. They provide financial and strategic support to get art out of storage and bring it to communities. Art Bridges loaned us the Bruce Nauman piece that's in the show called No New Museum. Art Bridges is also the sponsor of tonight's program and a few events that are upcoming that I wanted you to make you aware of. One is next Tuesday, March 23rd at 6 p.m. It's called 3 on 3, a panel discussion, and we have invited 3 professors from Lenore Rhine University. They each are a different discipline. One is education, one is philosophy, and the other is sociology. And we invited them in to look at contemporary voices and then respond to the 3 artists' work. And then we'll have this panel discussion next Tuesday night. And I encourage you to sign up for that. Next Thursday will be another special time. We are bringing in artist Juan Logan. He is one of the voices represented in Contemporary Voices. And he will be joining us Thursday, March 25th at 10:30 a.m. for our Coffee and the Co. And we actually filmed him coming in to view the show, and he's going to contextualize his own work amongst Bruce Nauman's and Joseph Kasuth. So please join us for that. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, Dr. Victoria Bradbury. Dr. Bradbury is a new media artist. Her work weaves together programming code, physical computing, body, and object. She's assistant professor of new media at University of North Carolina, Asheville. She's been a member of the New Media Caucus Board of Directors and has served on the Media Arts Project Board. Victoria completed a practice-based PhD titled The Performativity of Code in Participatory New Media Artworks. And that was with CRUM, which is the curatorial resource for upstart media bliss. And this is done at the University of Sunderland in the UK. Her artworks have been exhibited at Revolve Gallery in Asheville, Harvestworks in New York, the Albright Knox and Hallwalls Gallery in Buffalo, the Front in NOLA, and New Britain Museum of American Art. And she joins us tonight from her home in Asheville, where she lives with her husband, 2 kids, some chickens, I believe I read in your bio. She's going to be sharing tonight about her work in new media, including a 2020 exhibition she had at the Front Gallery in New Orleans called Switch. And I came across this project a few weeks ago, and I immediately reached out to Victoria to see if she'd do a program with us. And fortunately for all of us, she responded to my cold call, which was this crazy email I sent her. So I'm just thankful she did that. So welcome, Victoria. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Victoria. She's probably going to share her screen, but I've asked her, I had a special request. I asked if she'd provide some commentary on Bruce Nauman's No New Museum, which is actually what inspired us having this conversation around new media. So I'm going to turn it over to Victoria. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Christina. I'm so pleased to be here, and thank you to the Hickory Museum of Art for providing this opportunity and this space for all of us to come together. I'm thrilled to be able to share a bit with you about my own practice, but leading into that, just talking more generally about new media. And we're a small group, so feel free to post any questions you have in the chat or interrupt me or raise your little Zoom hand. I'm very used to multimodal Zoom conversations from teaching on Zoom for the last year. So don't be shy about jumping in and asking any questions you have or bringing up references that the work that I'm going to show you brings up for you. So yeah, again, thanks so much to the museum. It's great to make this contact with you, and it's been really wonderful getting to know you during this process. I do want to briefly pause for a serious acknowledgement of the act against the Asian American community in Atlanta that happened this week, and just acknowledge the grief that people are going through in Atlanta and in the country in general due to that racist act. So okay, so I'm going to share my screen next. And I'm going to start, as Christina mentioned, by talking with you a bit about the Bruce Nauman piece. Now, I am by no means a Bruce Nauman scholar, but I did study video art in my master's program and watched quite a bit of his work. And he's so important in terms of the history of video as a medium. So I'm going to start by talking and grounding us a bit in this conversation about Bruce Nauman's work, and then in a conversation about video as an art medium, and then broadening that out to what it means to work with technology and what we call new media, which are hardly new at this point, as an art making tool. So I'm going to start by playing this video of the piece. You may have seen this in the gallery already, but this is the piece as installed at the Hickory Museum of Art. It occurs to me that I didn't share my audio when I shared screen, so 1 second. Okay, so what kind of feelings do you have after watching that video? Maybe you can put it in the chat. Did it make you feel calm? It might have created a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of stress for that. I'm gonna move ahead here to a still of the piece, No New Museum. So when we watch this piece, we do get this sense of panic, this sense of discomfort. And though I haven't seen it in the gallery, perhaps Christina can attest to the fact that it really fills the space with noise. She described to me walking down the hallway and you hear this no, and you come towards the piece, and it kind of draws you in and makes you wonder what is happening on the screen. And you come to the screen and you see this person in a clown costume jumping up and down, saying no over and over. It's quite grotesque. And this trope of the clown as kind of a grotesque figure has come up in popular culture, and as well as in art in a variety of ways. But particularly in Bruce Nauman's clown torture series, which this is a part. One thing that's key to this is the play with language. So Nauman is using this word no over and over and over again, and it kind of starts to lose its meaning, right? So what is this word? Does it become on? Does it kind of break apart into its individual sounds as we're hearing it over and over? I think that's particularly interesting and something for you to keep in mind as I go through this presentation, because the role that language plays in video art, because of the sound component, as well as in new media art, becomes a really important thread to the works that I'm going to show you. So I want you to think about language, and language as a performative act and what that means and what it can do. Throughout this talk, I'm going to talk through various ways that artists work with technology, work with new media, work with video, how they made that possible over time, particularly in 1987 and before, when this piece was created. And then I'm going to focus on a variety of artists whose work I particularly admire, and then get into talking about my own work. And a lot of the pieces that I'm going to show you are going to have a thread to this piece by Nauman. This, whether it's through technology or through this idea of the image of the clown, or the use of costume or puppetry. So why me? Why was I brought on for this conversation? So this is an image that I took earlier today of myself with this ventriloquist dummy head. So this is Zelda. And this is a ventriloquist dummy that my grandfather created before I was born, and really sowed the seeds of this interest in the image of the clown and ventriloquism, which I have always seen as a thread going throughout my work. My grandfather, Bradbury, was an amateur ventriloquist. He built two of his own ventriloquist dummies, Oscar and Zelda. And I inherited them when he passed on in 2008, as well as this book called Ventriloquism for Fun and Profit, that he used to actually construct the two dummies. So it's got instructions in here for how to construct a ventriloquist dummy. And instructions are an important part of my work as well. So Zelda, it has been said that she looks a bit like me, that there might be a family resemblance. She does have a bit of a resemblance to my late grandmother, my grandfather's wife. And as a side note, I did lobby for my 2-year-old daughter to be named Zelda, but my husband objected, asking, at what point in her young life do you think it's appropriate to take that dummy out of a suitcase and tell her that that was her name, that was who she was named after? I had to agree on that one. So that's just some of my background in terms of this relationship with ventriloquism, with costume, with the notion of the clown. So I'll move ahead, and we're going to watch a brief clip from Nam June Paik's Global Groove from 1973 to contextualize this idea of video, but also Nam June Paik, who's often cited as the father of video art because he was one of the really early adopters of the medium, one of the people who was really working expressively and experimentally with video when it first became available to artists to use. I want to center Paik because of the way that he's starting to think about network technologies and the expansion of technology in this particular piece.
This is a glimpse of a video landscape of tomorrow, when you will be able to switch to any TV station on the earth, and TV guides will be as fat as the Manhattan telephone book.
Okay, so in the beginning of this piece, the narrator is talking about this video landscape of tomorrow. And to give you some context, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, when artists just started working with video, and really into the 80s, they were very concerned about the one-way nature of video, in terms of the fact that what they called broadcast television was coming at viewers. It was being produced and it was being sold to you, or being fed to you as a viewer, and you're meant to just take it in. And so a big part of the ideas that video artists were working with in the early days of using the technology as an art medium was this idea of self-creating media that could be made by artists and could have a unique voice and then be put out there and viewed. So there was this aspect of this, and there was a big aspect of what's called signal processing. And you see that here with these dancers. You can see that you have this manipulation of the video image, which is being done through analog tools. And I'll show you some examples of those. I love that line when in this piece where they say that the number of channels is going to be as thick as the Manhattan phone book. And if you just think about that and the kind of cultural reference there of, first of all, 2021, what's a phone book? And just that idea that, of course, we have that many channels. We have so many channels now, but not only that, of course, we have the internet. So moving to the next slide, we have on the left an image from a place called the Experimental Television Center in Owego, New York. And this was a place that was meant for video artists to come to, and video and sound artists to come to and process video and sound images using these analog processors. And this was the Sandine image processor, which continued to be available in the Signal Cultural Residency, which was also based in Owego in the same place until recently when it's moved to Colorado. And this notion in the 60s and 70s leading into when the Nauman piece was made in 1987 of how could artists make video? How could artists even use technology when they didn't necessarily have access to it? It was very expensive, and not everybody had a video camera. We all have video very easily accessible on our phones now, but that was absolutely not the case at that time, as many of you might remember. So in order to access the technology to make video, artists had to either go to residencies that were established to allow artists to work with technology and to shoot and edit video, or I'll show you another example of an instance where artists were also invited into television studios to create work. But just to give you an example of what this analog video processing was like, this is a clip of a contemporary artist from, European artist, I believe from the Netherlands, Rosa Menkman, who is experimenting with the Sandine image processor that you see on the left. So you can see that she's pulling in a video image and then using these analog knobs to create visual effects. So it becomes very much like an instrument that you can learn and play and understand what the various knobs do and how they're going to manipulate their video and change the image that you're creating. You can plug and unplug the different nodes to one another to create different effects. And all of these effects are things that we can do now on software like Adobe Premiere and other video editing software, iMovie, etc. But the effects that we have in current day video technology and current day video editing software come from machines like the Sandine image processor, things that people were doing in a more analog way in the 1960s and 70s. So anyone familiar with this artist? So William Wegman, who became well known because of his work being broadcast on Sesame Street and other really widely broadcast formats, but his artistic practice also involved his dogs, and this piece is called Two Dogs and a Ball, and here he is showing his dogs as you can imagine off screen, someone is moving a ball as they move their heads to watch the ball and follow it. Their eyes are very intently following this off camera image. And this is an example of a project that was created at, in this case, WGBH in Boston, where Wegman shot some of his reels with his dogs. And he was invited to be basically an artist in residence at the television studio. So it's really interesting to think about the kind of ways that artists were accessing equipment at this time. So I'll show you a brief clip of Dog Duet. Okay, and there's so many great Wegman videos out there. I encourage you to look at more of his work, his early work, and then how it develops into a more narrative. He starts to do fairy tales with the dogs, get them dressed up, etc. But you know, at this stage, as a video artist working with moving images, working with the black and white moving image, you know, he was really thinking about what he could do with this medium. How can he use it? How can he use lighting and movement to create something that can be contextualized as art? Okay, so I want to jump ahead to a different art movement that is emerging with the emergence of the internet and the ability for more people to access the internet. And this is net.art. And this is the piece and the artist that I'm showing you here is thought of as a very seminal piece of net.art called My Boyfriend Came Back from the War. It's by Olia Lealina, who you can see on the right of this frame. And it's an interactive browser-based piece. It's very poetic. It's black and white, like the image on the left. And you click through these iframes, which is an old way of coding where the HTML page is split into different quadrants and sections. And you follow this story of these lovers where one is going off to war, and you don't quite know what happens to their romance, but the story kind of unfolds in front of you as you navigate through the browser. So when we look at this, we see some relationship to Wegman, right? We see the black and white image. We see the use of technology as a medium. And we see something really interesting, which also comes up in Warhol's work and the Campbell's soup cans, this idea of popular culture. So with Warhol, we were thinking about bringing screen printing, a popular medium that was meant for commercial purposes, and bringing that into the high art realm. And that's what we're really seeing with video as well. With video and the use of the internet and other technologies as art media is this idea of bringing media that aren't necessarily intended or created for use by artists, but then seeing how artists are going to use them and incorporate them into their work and experiment and see what kind of interesting gestures can be made. So I do see a relationship between what was happening in the mid-century with Warhol and pop art and what was happening with emerging technologies. We can also think about people like John Cage and Merce Cunningham, who of course taught at Black Mountain College outside of Asheville, between you and I. And the work that they were doing, bringing back this idea of language through Fluxus scores and through scores for performative action. So if we think about the way that Cage and Cunningham were deconstructing the notion of composition and score, what is a score? What is a musical score? Well, they were taking it and basically turning it into instructions that could be interpreted quite broadly for performance. And we can see this through a variety of Fluxus artists, including Ben Patterson, who's performing solo for double bass here, where he has a very long list, I believe 25 instructions for how you can perform with the double bass. He had been trained as a classical bassist and then started working and exploring and experimenting with Fluxus and with scores, with more experimental scores as an art medium. So we have this notion of scoring, and here comes the relationship to language. So scores are, or compositions or Fluxus scores are text for interpretation. And here's where the link comes to net.art and to artwork that's starting to use programming code. So we're seeing, this is an image from an early computer, these kind of room-sized computers. In this case, it's from 1957, an IBM 704 computer with an IBM 711 card reader at NASA in 1957. So we're seeing this really compelling emergence in the mid-20th century between computing becoming more ubiquitous, becoming used across a variety of sectors, and the use of scores, performative scores in Fluxus, but in art more generally. So there is this interest, there is this kind of cross-cultural notion of the use of language as a performative medium. And I like to think of that as artists sort of grabbing onto this idea of, can we use programming code? Can we use the internet? Can we use interactivity? These things that computers start to allow us to do that also relate to previous art movements, such as pop art, such as Fluxus. And these things were kind of happening and emerging simultaneously as computing started to be adopted by commercial entities, by business, but also by increasingly by individuals and more broad access to computers and to technology. So we can look at a piece at the turn of the 21st century by these New York-based artists, Mendy and Keith Obadike. They have a variety of net-based artworks, but I'll show you this one from 2001 called Blackness for Sale, where Keith sold his blackness, or this notion of blackness, on eBay, an auction platform. So all these ideas come in about what does it mean for a Black man in America to sell his blackness on eBay? You know, is it this commodity that people want to appropriate, that might make them cool? Does it reference slave auctions? Does it speak about capitalism in general and how we buy and sell things on this commercial platform at this moment in 2001, when this platform was actually a pretty big place for commerce online? So we see artists kind of challenging emerging technologies, but also commercial entities and how commerce is happening online in really creative and clever ways. And then we can look at an artist like Miao Ying, who is someone that works across technologies. This particular screenshot that I took is from a project called Chinternet Plus, and this particular piece is called Our Mystery from 2016. And Miao Ying is showing the interwoven complexities of the internet in China and the internet in the West, and showing this conglomeration of pop culture mixed with politics. Lauren Cornell, curator Lauren Cornell in 2016 talks about this project featuring a motley crew of animals, celebrities, and regular people clapping in sync, showing how rapidly a group can be formed and immediately following the creation of a logo. So she really does play with kind of logos, commercial symbology, but also the mixing of culture that happens on the internet, and really happens only on the internet because of this globalized technology, which Nam June Paik, as we know, was predicting, decades before. Miao Ying has a particularly, I think, astute view on pop culture on the internet and the life of netizens, both in China and the West, because she's lived in both places. She grew up in Shanghai, came to the US for graduate school, moved back to China, and then back to New York. So I really encourage you to look at her work because it's really humorous, it's political, it's just really sharp and fascinating to see the kind of combinations that she creates with GIFs. And then we can look at this piece by Bagosi Sekuhuni, Consciousness Engine Absent Black Father Bot, which is a dual channel video piece. So here we're seeing, we're bringing back video. We're seeing this incorporation of two floating video heads in the gallery space, and they're having a conversation with one another. And the two heads are representing the artist and his father, who he actually met on Facebook. He didn't have a previous relationship with him. And they had this longstanding relationship of having conversations over Facebook. And he takes those, the artist takes those conversations and processes them through algorithm and represents the conversations that they were having, in this case, through this Pepper's Ghost display format of these floating hologram heads. Thinking about, chat bots, thinking about code mediated conversation, like a conversation between a father and a son that should be really personal, but is happening in this public, but also commercialized arena, which is, interesting to see how he's presenting it in this way, in a way that's both critical, but also really personal. This is Alison Burkoy, and this particular project is called Push the Button. And here, Burkoy, these are actually, what you're looking at is a sculptural piece. So this is on the wall, this is on a wall. And you have these stuffed fabric figures, these four figures sitting on a couch, watching television and just having commentary together. And the four faces that you see are all Burkoy's face. They're all the artist's face. But look, their voices are manipulated and they look quite different projected across the different figures. So I'll just play you a quick excerpt of this.
This is funny. Shut up.
Shut up.
So you can see here the dimensionality of the clothes on the back. Oh, okay. Looks like you only got a short. Okay.
Where's the remote?
Okay, there you go. So you can see that here she has a button press, which, like net art, brings in this notion of interactivity. So all of a sudden the viewer, through technology, is able to engage with the piece and have some kind of input in it, even if it's as simple as a button press. Burkoy makes another interactive installation where it actually gauges the number of people in the gallery, and she has figures somewhat similar to these or referential to these, where they're actually talking to you in the gallery space and giving you feedback, commenting on your coming and going. And can you imagine if the Bruce Nauman piece that we looked at the start of this actually knew that you were there? I know that a couple of you posted in the chat, interesting that you felt interesting confusion and inescapable frustration. Well, if that clown was actually saw you there and started to talk to you and sort of bring you into the piece, not to say that it makes a different piece, not to create a value judgment between interactivity and non-interactivity, but suddenly when the piece is talking to you, it starts to potentially make you feel uneasy in a different kind of way. And I think Burkoy's work does that. So let's see. Interactivity instills memory and spawns critical thought. I think that's a really great point. Absolutely. It's very memorable when something starts to talk back to you in that way.
I don't want to watch this anymore.
This is what's
okay. And then we have so again, I'm following this track of language, of this use of kind of clownified figures, but also this use of technology. And in Ken Feingold's If Then, and I had the privilege of seeing this when it was installed in the Whitney Biennial in 2002 and was just fascinated by it. But what you have And perhaps some of you have seen this work as well, or other of Feingold's work. He's worked a lot with ventriloquist type figures, but these two heads are installed in a box full of basically styrofoam peanuts, as if they've been shipped. They're identical to one another, and they're having this very esoteric conversation. The conversation is generated in real time. It's based on an algorithm that Feingold has written or had written for the piece. And they're saying these very, I'm not sure how to describe it. I guess I should play it to show you, but these very, these questions that are very open-ended about the meaning of life. So let's have a look at this.
I think we are exactly alike. You roof moonlight. Is this life? Imagine being me. Do you see things clearly? How do you feel? Sometimes I feel very confused. Can I control my feelings?
I think there's a lot of themes there that Nauman's also talking about with a different type of gesture, but this idea of, you know, imagine being me. Do you see things clearly? Okay. I have two more artists to show you that I'm going to talk a bit about my work. This is Ayo Okasinde, and it's a piece called The Rift, an Afronaut's Journey. And he's, the video will show you some of it, but he basically puts on this costume. He walks around, in this case, New York City, and he's talking about representation and misrepresentation of people of African descent. And in particular, using this idea of the future space, and also this idea of alienation, walking around in a large city, but still feeling alienated, and then making the costume to kind of add another layer of alienation to that sensation. So I'm going to play this video.
Well, welcome back. An incredible story from space.
When people say they saw 4 lantern-like objects forming a diamond shape in the air, hovering in the sky for over an hour. And aviation experts say they don't know what it was. It wasn't a plane.
Need to prepare themselves very soon for an announcement from our government that there is, in fact, extraterrestrial presence engaging this planet and the human race.
In the future, where an African astronaut could come back. I am the future.
And then
welcome back. An
the final piece that I'll just I'm just going to mention is bringing Rosa Mankman's work back into it. I didn't want to talk about her in relation to the Sandine image processor and not come back to her work, but she's a glitch artist, and this is a piece that was installed in Transfer Gallery. I think I saw it in 2019 there, but it's a virtual reality piece that also includes an installation. She works a lot with glitching the signal, with glitching the video signal, but also glitching code, and then displaying that through abstraction, through these really beautiful abstract landscapes that she creates, in this case, in virtual reality. So I'd encourage you to look more at her work, but just this notion of the glitch, which I think also comes in so strongly with that Bruce Nauman piece. He's essentially creating a glitch in language with that no, 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 creating a glitch in our experience of the gallery space, in our experience of the art, where it's an interruption. And that's what happens with a technological glitch. So if we're viewing a web page and all of a sudden, I don't know if that's ever happened to anyone here, but I know it's happened to me. My computer gets overloaded, and then all of a sudden I've got weird pixels showing up in my browser. So the glitch artists and Rosa Menkman in particular, through their research, are looking at what happens if we amplify the glitch. You know, perhaps all of life is the glitch, and we want to really focus in on that notion of glitching technology and what that can bring to the conversation. And it's also really visually beautiful. Okay, so I guess I will talk a bit about my own work, but hopefully that journey through some new media artists who I really admire, brought some interesting dialogue to the conversation of how artists are working with technology, but how artists are also just being artists, right? And I think that for me, I love to work with materials. I love to work with physical materials and sculptural materials, but also digital materials. And I don't necessarily separate them. I see them all as kind of one and the same in my practice. And so this particular exhibition, which is called Switch or Switch, which I had shown at the Front Gallery in New Orleans in the fall, involves this series of digital projectors. So I will take you off to show you my website. So I created this series of projectors, which are both digital and analog. So the analog aspect of them is they're not a whole lot more than a flashlight in a shoebox that's just projecting a clear piece of acetate with a letter on it onto this hanging screen. But then they have a servo motor, which is attached to an Arduino microcontroller, which is moving a horizontal slide holder back and forth between two letters. And in doing so, you can see here, I love to show the wires in my projects and just let them be. So you can see they're kind of a bit messy, but they're all connecting to this one microcontroller controlling these servo motors that are on the bottom of each projector. Oh, this is another piece that's in the gallery that I was able to make at Pilchuck Glass School last year, which is a very simple glass piece with LEDs in it, but it also has conductive copper formed connections, and the two pieces come apart, and then when they come together, a very simple switch is created just by the copper conductive connections coming together, and they light up the piece. So back to the projectors, you can see that they move between Shiza and Switch, and the motors just move back and forth over and over on repeat, showing that text. And then also in the gallery, I'm showing prints and stills and a video documentation of a virtual reality piece that I created in 2019 called Blue Boar VR. And that's what these two children are watching on the monitor here is Blue Boar VR. So I'm going to take you to that piece next. So Blue Boar VR is a virtual reality game that's created based on the story of my ancestor, my 10th great grandmother, who was convicted of witchcraft in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. Her name was Mary Bradbury. She was 75 years old at the time. She was found guilty of witchcraft for having turned into a blue boar, among other crimes. And it was people who were her neighbors who accused her of the crimes. And I have her court transcripts, and I based a lot of my work on those transcripts and actually her words and the words of her accusers and her husband who testifies in the trial. So I'll just play this video quickly of this project, Blue Boar VR, but I took her story and I translated it into a virtual reality interactive game, which I hope someday you'll get a chance to play when I can display it here in Asheville or elsewhere for you to see. But it's a game where you can play from 3 different perspectives, and you're going to see that when you start the game, you end up in a gallery space, and you can choose to play from the perspective of Mary, so the accused person, the perspective of the cars who were her neighbors, the accusers, or the perspective of the blue boar itself. And there's kind of a play with this fantastical notion of the blue boar. What is it, and what can it do in this space? At a moment when the phrase witch hunt is repeatedly misused, Blue Boar VR invites viewers to play in the complex absurdity of accusations that were used against the artist's 10th great-grandmother in the infamous Salem witch trials. Using a voxelized embroidered tapestry motif and drawing from actual trial testimony of the tried and convicted Mary Bradbury, Blue Boar VR raises questions about truth, fiction, and justice by inserting viewers directly into the Blue Boar story. Play as Mary, picking carrots and fruits in your garden before an errant beast crashes through your fence and runs off into the wood. Ride on horseback as George Carr, imagining you see a blue boar dash at your horse's legs. Or play as the boar himself as you hover over Salisbury Village, reforesting the town. Blue Boar VR considers multiple perspectives in a scenario where wild accusations and mass hysteria are escalating out of hand. It is by replaying the past that we can begin to imagine possible futures. Okay, so I'm excited to be working on another VR project currently. This back here is going to be the interface for it. So stay tuned about that. This is a chicken jacket. These are all individual chicken feathers that I've been making, but I've been working with some student research assistants on developing models for that new game, and it'll be my second VR project. Okay, and then just to show you maybe one or two more works, this is another piece called Electronic Ginseng 2.0, where the user can click through a story about collecting ginseng in Appalachia, and the ginseng physical wooden sculpture moves its legs when it's picked. As many of you may know, there's a lot of lore around ginseng's kind of magical properties, and I wanted to play with that and play with this notion of, when you pull the ginseng, it screams, or it makes some movement. So I'm going to play this very short clip. I think it's 5 seconds. Okay, so that's electronic ginseng, and you can see here a little bit clearer the movement. That goes through the story. So that was one of the first pieces I made that actually involved creating wooden gears that were moved with servo motors, and I really enjoyed working that way. And then the last project I'll show is one called Witch Pricker, which I made when I was living in the UK, and this drew on a story from Newcastle upon Tyne, where I was living at the time, and viewers can come into the gallery and take a pin from a pin cushion, and they can push the pin into these 5 strawberries that are hanging on the wall. And the program will randomize how many of the strawberries are guilty of witchcraft. And you're the witch pricker. You're the person that is doing the witch test to determine which of these witches is guilty of witchcraft. When you finish doing so, you get printed a receipt at the end of the gameplay that allows you to take it to the gallery desk and redeem it for chocolate coins. So for however many witches you were able to catch. So if you got like 2 witches, you get 2 chocolate coins, etc. So I'll just play this quick video.
Greetings, Witch Pricker. After I say go, you have 20 seconds. Use the needle to prick each strawberry under the petticoat. Pick up the needle. Ready? Set. Go. You found a witch. She is not a witch. You found a witch. You found a witch. You found a witch.
All right, and I will end my presentation there, but thank you very much. I'm very much open to questions if anyone has anything they would like to ask. So thank you.
And you can ask them, or you can like unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can write your questions in the chat window. And John, the executive director at HMA, he writes, "This has been great, thank you. He had to run to dinner, but we'll watch the rest of the recording." Oh, Victoria, this really has been great. I loved how you provided a framework for talking about new media, starting with analog, moving into computers and digital, and I'm checking out all these artists. I wrote their names down to check out their work. And somehow I missed the witch pricker when I was looking at your artwork, so I'm going to check that out as well. That was great.
Thanks. That one was really fun to do, and it really enjoyable because I got to see people working with it in the gallery and seeing how it functioned. And that particular piece, I coded myself in C++, which was pretty challenging to do, but it always kind of surprises me when things work as well as they do in the gallery space, because that's another thing about new medias, is that, you know, things don't always work, but that particular one worked really well and had a pretty good response. And it was interesting to research that story, which was a true witch test that had been done in the city of Newcastle upon Tyne.
So coming at this from my perspective, where I'm the exhibitions manager, I install all our exhibits and maintain them. So new media scares me. Yes.
Oh, I don't blame you.
At least Bruce Nauman has been fairly easy, but in looking at some of these, I'm like, oh my gosh, because I'm the one who would answer the calls like over the weekend when something's not working or
exactly. I think there has to be some
of your pieces. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there has to be some level of acceptance that things break at some point. And then there has to be a backup plan as well, right? So there has to be some kind of documentation of the project. And at the end of the day, when you have complicated interactive works, the thing that really lasts in perpetuity is the documentation. So you really do want to have it documented well, because that's going to show how it actually was working. But I mean, yeah, it definitely causes additional considerations. But hopefully a lot of the artists that worked in this medium are used to troubleshooting and used to, revisiting things and making them work. So they would be a partner with you.
Yeah, well, this Bruce Nauman has really been a first for us, and I hope that it'll open the door to our audience being more accepting and excited about bringing additional new media works to the museum. And I wanted to mention, you mentioned Warhol and kind of how he fits into this, and a cheap plug, we have a Warhol exhibit right now at the Art Museum, Works by Warhol. So when you come out and check Contemporary Voices on the first floor, be sure to stop by Works by Warhol on the second floor, because I've had that same thought of like, wow, these artists are working in like with video art with the Bruce Nauman and Joseph Kasuth working in neon, they're right in line with what Warhol was doing with
exactly, yeah, with
art, right?
Pop art and making these popular media into art media, which we just saw explode after that time. So, and also collaborative ways of working is another thing that comes up a lot in new media. A lot of times people either work as a collective or people collaborate with technologists who work on different parts of the project, because one artist can't necessarily do every single technological aspect of their project. Different people approach it in different ways. But, another thing about new media is you're constantly learning new tools. And so sometimes the production time frames have to be a bit longer. Like projects might take quite a while because you're learning a new tool, you're coming up with the idea, you're bringing the tool and the idea together, and then you're producing it and making it work. So there are a lot of technical considerations, which, I'm sure when, working out things with printmaking and with other technologies also involve a lot of experimentation. And that's always been a part of the artistic process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just as technology changes, like even just thinking about the Bruce Nauman, I showed you, this was one of the tapes.
Yes, I love it.
The master volume for Bruce Nauman, which this is a regular VHS tape just for comparison. And so we're actually playing it off of DVDs, the two screens, but technology breaks and changes, and there's a lot to consider.
I would love to know where that piece was recorded. I know that he worked with an actor, which is really interesting, but it's just, by 1987, people did have access to, home movie cameras. So I do wonder if it was shot in his artist studio with a commercial video camera, or with a, I guess, what would you call it? Just like a video camera that would be widely accessible, or with like a more professional studio setup. So yeah, it's so interesting. And I mean, if you think about like a lot of the like children's television and other things that were being produced at a similar time, like Pee-wee's Playhouse, for example, that show was produced by people who went to Cal Arts, people with art backgrounds who also had their own creative practices. So it's just, I know for me, I worked in theater production between when I graduated from undergraduate, and really loved working in that space. But part of it had to do with access to tools, being able to work with the woodworking studio. And that's always been a consideration for artists, whether you're working with analog or digital tools. How can you access the tools that you need and want to make your work to allow it to grow?
Yeah. Well, anyone have a question? If not, we can end. Victoria, thank you so much. The mission of Hickory Museum of Art is to bring people together and inspire creativity through the power of art. And you definitely helped us meet the mission tonight. Thank you.